Good morning, Broncos fans. You're watching Legends of Mile High podcast, where we talk about history and current events. So, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining. Whether you're in the mountain time zone or somewhere around the world, thank you. Hopefully, you will enjoy the show today because we are going to be talking about some historical evidence of Sean Payton and his ability to draft well, especially along the offensive line. So we'll talk about that and anything else that you want to talk about. If you're in the chat and you want to talk about something else, just throw it in there. Even history. I mean, this is what this show is about. So if you want to talk about history, you want to talk about anything, just throw it right in the chat. But thank you for joining. Again, I'm Thomas Hall. You can follow me at Thomas Hall NFL on Twitter. And also, don't forget to like the show and don't forget to subscribe to Mile High Huddle so you can get these early morning alerts so you can join the show in the morning. I know it's early for some folks. It's early for me, but I still love getting up and doing this every morning. So again, thank you. Now let's chat a little bit about how hard it is to find draft picks. It really is not as easy as people make it out to be. So when teams are trading away established players so they know who they are for draft picks, I tend to get a little bit worried about it only because when you look across the draft, it's not easy. I was comparing it to the game of craps the other day, the random rolls of each of the numbers. And the first round, if you look at the first round compared to a 7, it's actually pretty good. First round's pretty good. The probability of hitting on an impact player in the first round is a lot better than rolling a 7. But if you go down the rest of the numbers and match them up to the corresponding draft rounds, it's almost identical. So it is kind of a crapshoot, especially after round 1. So that doesn't bode well. And then when you're looking at the Denver Broncos sitting in the third round for their first pick, that makes it even harder, right? So you get to the third round and you're down to a pretty low probability of finding an impact player. And the Broncos have to find an impact player, right? They have to come away from the draft finding impact players. If you look back, Kansas City, the reason why they're so good, other than they found, a generational like quarterback in Patrick Mahomes, they were able to hit on impact players later in the draft. They found Tyreek Hill, they found Travis Kelce, and they were one of the better drafters over the last 10 years of finding those impact players throughout the draft. And so that's why they've been a formidable opponent and why they've been challenging for Super Bowls and winning Super Bowls and winning the AFC West time and time again. So the Broncos have got to have a little bit of luck in there if they want to come away this season and ready to compete for a few seasons going forward. So before I jump into the numbers and before I jump into what I found about Sean Payton and his ability, I'm going to jump into the chat, see who's here this morning. We've got a few people coming in. We've got David Youngin. Thank you for jumping in here. David says, morning Broncos country. I'm hoping that we get aggressive in free agency and land some starters in the draft. Yeah, I agree, David. The Broncos have to be aggressive in free agency this season because they have a lot of holes on their roster that they need to fix, and they don't have a lot of draft capital to go into the draft. And I'd like to see them be really aggressive along the offensive line. And they're going to have to be moderately aggressive on the defensive line if they don't re-sign Draymond Jones, was what it looks like, which I think is a mistake. And then people are talking about them maybe releasing Mike Purcell. So that's going to be a pretty thin defensive line once all those happen. So I think they're going to have to use free agency quite a bit this year, and they have the cap space once they make some releases that they're going to make. Jeremy Sean coming in, thank you. Good to see you this morning. He says, "Morning, Thomas. I'm hoping that Payton and Payton combination yields some great draft returns." Yeah, absolutely, and that's some of the things we're going to talk about because the partnership between Mickey Loomis and Sean Payton in New Orleans produced some really good drafts, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Let's see who else is in the chat this morning. We've got Michael Ronquillo, the man, the myth, the legend coming in. Good morning, Thomas Hall on Legends of Mile High. Go Broncos and buck 'em. Well, thank you, Michael. Appreciate it. And Greg Smith's coming in from Facebook saying, good morning, Broncos country, Denver Broncos for life. Yeah, thank you all for coming in. This is a fun show in the morning for me, and I really appreciate you guys coming in. Appreciate any support you can give me. Make sure you like the show. So thank you very much. David Youngin's coming back in. Morning, Thomas. Would you take Hooker if he falls to the third round? Well, I've talked about this before. It would be an intriguing prospect, right? He seems like he's got a load of talent. He is, his draft stock has dropped because of his knee injury. But the only thing that worries me is he has a knee injury, so he's going to take some time to recover from that. You've got Russell Wilson, who's obviously they're going to give him at least another year to see if he can turn it around. And Hooker's coming in at I think 26. He'll be, he might be 28 before he gets his first start in the league. So that kind of setting him back from the rest of the group, so to speak. So that worries me a little bit. But if he's there to take and the Broncos take him, I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. I do think they need to use those third rounders for other positions. I think quarterback is, quarterback is worrisome, obviously, based on what we saw from Russell Wilson last year. But I think the combination of Payton, different coaches, different schemes, is going to be better for him. I think the quarterback position is going to be set. I think they could wait another year, grab a later round quarterback to develop. But like I said, if he falls to the third round, I'm not going to, and the Broncos take him, I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. But there are a few worries for me with Hooker is all. But yeah, great question. Thank you very much. So let's talk a little bit about what the Payton and Payton, as you said earlier, combination can look like, because based on what we saw from Mickey Loomis and Sean Payton in all their years in the draft. Now, I know you guys probably have heard me say this a few times, but I'll say it again. I have analyzed the draft since 2009, and I built a actual value calculator based on the probabilities of every round, position, and what it would look like if you can make trades. So what's the actual value of a draft choice becoming an impact player or even a primary starter? So then you can start to see what is the value of these positions, and what are the values of these rounds? What are the values of your trades? If you want to see it, go to Tableau Public, look up my name, Thomas Hall. You'll find it. You can look it up yourself. You can toggle between different rounds. It's kind of cool, and it'll give you the probabilities of trades. It'll give you the probabilities of different rounds, finding impact starter, and that's what we really are looking at today: impact starter. And so I've looked at the draft, and the New Orleans Saints from 2009 to 2019. Looking at those players drafted and their impact to 2021, the Saints were the best at finding impact players as a percentage of the draft picks that they had. Now that's pretty impressive, because to be that consistent over the years is pretty incredible. So they're ahead of Kansas City, who's been really good at it. They're ahead of, Green Bay, I think, is next, or Baltimore. I can't remember exactly who's next. They're ahead of them. Now, the only problem with the Saints is they tended to have less draft picks than others. So they didn't get as many players. So that's important to understand. Their percentage was higher. They didn't get as many players, but it was only 2 compared to Kansas City. So not a huge difference. But the more draft picks you have, the more chance you have of getting that. So that's impressive. But the combination of Loomis and Payton there were number one in finding impact players as a percentage. So him coming to work with Payton, George Payton, who seems to be has a pretty good eye for talent. His first draft seemed to be really good. Second draft was a little bit iffy, but them working together like he did in New Orleans, I think is going to bode well for the Broncos. And especially when you're looking at the offensive line. Right? They think the offensive line needs to be addressed. And I put out an article, so go to Mile High Huddle, check it out. It is extremely hard to find an impact player along the offensive line in the third round. And Sean Payton's been able to do it, which is pretty cool. Sean Payton and Mickey Loomis in New Orleans. So if you go back and you look at those drafts, he found Armstead in the third round. And that guy's been a solid offensive tackle for many years, and he played for New Orleans for a long time. He's in Miami now. I think they just restructured his contract, but he found an impact player. I mean, the guy went to three Pro Bowls, so he actually played quite well. So um, that's pretty impressive. He also, if you look back even farther back, you can see that he drafted Jari Evans. That was a fourth rounder. Zach Strief, who is now the offensive line coach for the Broncos. He got him in the seventh round. Bushrod in the fourth. Carl Nix in the fifth. So he had some very good offensive line draft choices later in the rounds. And he also, went in the round one, he got Andrews Pete, he was a tackle coming out, but they moved him to guard. He's been to 3 Pro Bowls. Ramczyk was a first rounder. He's a one-time first team All Pro. I mean, when I'm looking at these numbers and I'm looking at these players, Sean Payton had a knack for getting them. I don't think he was really good at drafting quarterbacks or maybe some other positions, but offensive line, he hit on those draft choices. So I'm hoping that this offseason, going into the draft, that they're going to target a few offensive linemen for the future, and they're going to come away with at least one who turns out to be a really, really good player in the NFL. So that's an important thing to consider, even though the draft is hard. It is really hard. I know that people do a lot of research on the draft. You see these teams, they test, they interview, they do all these things, and then in the end, like I said, it's almost as random as rolling a dice. Now, I'm not saying that rolling the dice, I'm not saying that it's the same thing, but the probability of getting impact player is pretty close to that. And just like if you're playing craps, you want to hedge yourself against the house as much as you can, and so that's what that's what these teams do. They go out there and they do as much research as they can, but you can't ever, you can't judge when someone's going to be injured. You can't judge if somebody doesn't have the right work ethic and things like that. So it just ends up, it's a tough thing to do, but I have a little bit of hope for along the offensive line. So there's some folks that are going to be available in the third round, maybe in the fourth round along the offensive line that the Broncos are going to take a shot at. So let's jump in there. We got a few questions. We got Michael Ronquillo coming in with a question, and he's asking, should the Broncos sign a quarterback in free agency or the NFL draft? Yeah, again, I think the Broncos need to go after free agency first, because if someone falls like Hooker or something, that makes a difference, but they don't have a lot of draft picks. I'm a proponent of drafting a quarterback quite often a little bit later to develop and have a nice backup quarterback. But I think the Broncos need to go find somebody in free agency that can step in if Russell Wilson gets injured and still play at a high level. And asking a rookie quarterback to do that, I'm not sure that that's a great idea until, let him develop a little bit. So I'm hoping they find somebody to back up Russell Wilson in free agency. And I think they need to. I think they need to be prepared, because you're not always guaranteed to find that quarterback you want waiting for you when you draft, especially now when you see the Broncos don't start until pick 67. So yeah, that's my thoughts on it. And then Jeremy Sean's coming back in to say, if we can stay somewhat healthy this season, it will feel like we have a big influx of talent despite our limited draft picks this year. Yeah, I've been talking about that when they hired that health and fitness guru, and I was forgetting his name. I can't remember. I said that was probably the one single thing that they did that may create more victories and more success this season than just about anything else. If what he did for New Orleans and what they say he can do with the injuries, that's going to be huge. And you're right. There were so many injuries that I think if they could have stayed healthy, it would have been even with the disaster that the coaching was with Nathaniel Hackett, if they could have stayed healthy, I think the Broncos would have had a much, much more successful season. Maybe not playoff season, but I think they would have maybe seen a winning season. Bo Lowry. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate that. I don't know why I can't remember his name. It seems like an easy name to remember. Bo Lowry. I appreciate you coming in there and let me know, Michael. I'm going to try and remember that name because I seem to talk about him too often. Now, the other piece to the puzzle here that people I don't think are talking enough about is the defensive line. Now, the Broncos, they let Jermaine, Jones, they're going to let him walk. I actually think that's a wrong decision. I think that they're going to regret doing that. I think Draymond Jones is going to have one of his best seasons next year, just based on what I've seen, his progression. When defensive linemen tend to really start to come into their prime and start making a lot of those plays that people are interested in, like sacks and things like that. So I think it's a mistake to let him walk, but I think they're going to. I think they should use the franchise tag on him, or at least the non-exclusive, something to keep him around, at least get something for him, because people are talking about, oh, they're going to get a compensatory pick for him next year. That's not set in stone. If the Broncos are aggressive in free agency and they bring in an offensive tackle that's a similar salary, that's going to be a wash. They're not guaranteed to get that unless they just don't go into free agency with any sort of aggressiveness, and they get, wait around and get some lower end ones, which I also think is a mistake, because they need to fill some gaps in that roster. They've got to, and the defensive line is going to be one of them, especially if they also let Mike Purcell go. I talked about that before. If they let Mike Purcell go, they're going to be having a rotation starting out of DJ Jones, Matt Henningsen, and Uzurike. Those were two rookies from last year. Now, I think I like both of them. I really like the fourth rounder there, but that's a pretty interesting way to start the season. So I think letting Mike Purcell go is a bit of a question mark in my mind. I think they can let other players go that will free up more cap space and get them in a position to be a little bit more aggressive in free agency. But if they do that, they're going to have to go into the draft and free agency being very, 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 very aggressive on the defensive line, which is a position that I wasn't expecting to happen. I thought they might want to fill in the depth, but they're going to have to find two starters, because Sean Williams is also gone, right? He's an unrestricted free agent. They haven't talked about bringing him back. So they're gonna lose two starters and a key rotational player. So the Broncos are making sure that they have some defensive line gaps before they even get into free agency, which I thought the defensive line would have been a bit of a stronger suit had they make sure they kept Draymond Jones and kept Purcell around for at least another season. So they're going to go into the defensive line and looking for defensive line in the draft. And that's another position that's extremely hard to find in the third round. And I'm going to have an article about that as well. It's actually one of the harder positions to find an impact player in the NFL draft in the third round. Shai Vargas coming in. Thank you very much. Coming in from YouTube with a question. Do you think the Broncos will be better than last year? Yes, I do. I believe that the Broncos will be much better. I think the injury bug, like I was talking about earlier, will hopefully change. They've had some bad luck with injuries. It's time that they made some changes to make that better. So anytime that you actually have your starters and most of your team healthy, you're going to be a better team. I also think that the coaching last year was really bad. I think Nathaniel Hackett didn't have a real cohesive identity or offense. And I think it was a hodgepodge of different things that they put together. Russell Wilson being, a contributor to that didn't really fit well with the players or Russell Wilson himself. And then once you started to get into injuries, it made it even worse. You've got an experienced head coach coming in Sean Payton, who has a history of winning, who has a history of taking a quarterback, not just one quarterback, taking several quarterbacks and making them much better. I mean, everybody talks about Drew Brees. He's a Hall of Famer. He came to New Orleans. Sean Payton helped him become a Hall of Famer by changing the offense and making it fit him. But he also made Teddy Bridgewater a much better quarterback, got him a huge contract, I believe, in Carolina after he started 7 games. Jameis Winston was on his way to one of his better seasons, especially in reduction of interceptions and turnovers. So you have a track record of Sean Payton helping these quarterbacks. So he's going to help Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson's going to have a better season. He's going to return to that, more of his old self that we thought we were getting when all the fans were excited about Russell Wilson trade, thought we were getting it. And I think they're going to have a bounce back. So yes, absolutely. The Broncos are going to have a much better offense, which will lead to more points. The only problem I do see is I think their defense will not be as good. And, unless they can, Gregory can stay healthy. I think Randy Gregory is a key to that defense. They need to get pass rush. And I think losing Draymond Jones is going to hit that make that even worse. So they have to have Randy Gregory for 17 games. They are at least 16, 15 games in order to get some decent pass rush. So I think the defense will be less effective, but I think they'll be able to take more chances because the offense can score. So the Broncos will have more opportunities to hopefully get turnovers. And that's been my biggest knock. Even though the defenses have been pretty good, they just don't create enough takeaways. And that's what I think will help. Once the offense is doing their part, I think the defense will feel like they can take more of a chance at getting turnovers. So that's going to help. I think they're going to be a better team. I don't want to get too excited. Last year, I was way too excited. I was like Super Bowl contender, man. I was thinking they got a good defense. They have a pretty solid offensive line, and they've got a elite quarterback. What more do you need? And they were not. And so I'm not gonna get too excited yet. I definitely want to see some wins on the field happen before I jump on the playoff bandwagon. But I think they can. I think they can challenge for the playoffs. I think they're going to be that much better. And we got another Facebook user coming in. I appreciate you coming in here. I don't know your name, but thank you. And this Facebook user says, what do you think Payton should do in terms of addressing the O-line in both free agency and the draft? Yeah, well, free agency first. I've talked about Juwan Taylor. I think they should be very aggressive at going after him. I think he's a young guy who's improved every season that he's been in the NFL, and he's just hitting that prime. He's still young. You can be aggressive. You can go after him with the money that you've saved by not giving Draymond Jones that big contract. Go after him, and that's the first step, right? That's who you target first. And if you can land him, you can be a little bit less aggressive at the other two spots that you need to fill. So center and guard. I think guard, you got to go after somebody that's a pretty solid guard. You don't have to go out after an elite player. And I know Ben Powers has been kicked around, but I don't know if that's I don't know if they can spend that much money for just the two positions on the offensive line. So they may have to go to a step down, but I'd love to have Ben Powers, Brown. There's a couple other options. And then at center, I think you can, I keep saying this, you can get away with someone like a Rodney Hudson, right? For a single season to solidify that center position and kind of, change the trajectory of that. Because the Broncos have not had a solid center option for a while. And I think that they can go after somebody like that, hopefully rekindle his earlier days for a year. But I think they can definitely rebuild the offensive line with those three players, and spend big on the right tackle, spend a little less on the guard or center. And if you want to spend more on the center, right? If they decide that they want to go after somebody a little bit younger and they're going to spend a little bit more on center, then go after someone for a guard for like a Roger Saffold, another older player who's still got a little bit of gas left in the tank and hopefully can rekindle that. And then, of course, you definitely have to look to the future, especially if you do that. If you do that 1 year guy and at center or guard, then you've got to address that in the draft. And I think they should address it early with one of their third round picks. They need to go after. It would be cool if they could get Mauk out of North Dakota State or somebody like that, or maybe even take a chance on the guy that hurt his knee, Vuris, at the combine. Let him recover and slot him in at tackle next year, something like that. Somebody in the third round that hopefully can turn into an elite player would be great. Dom Hamriel coming in saying, good morning, Thomas Scott and Broncos Country, Denver Broncos for life. Thank you, Dom, for coming in. It's good seeing you here this morning. Appreciate it. Appreciate you coming in from Facebook. You're here almost every morning, so I really, really appreciate that. It's nice to have your comments in the draft. Johnny Baki coming. That was me on Facebook. Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, I recognize your name from Twitter. So I appreciate you coming in and making that comment, Johnny. Thank you very much. Jesse Hilborn coming in. Draft Steve Avila. I don't know Steve Avila, so I can't really talk about that. There's some other great draft gurus here at Mile High Huddle. I'd address that to, like Nick Kendall or Luke Patterson, somebody that has spent some time evaluating these players. I haven't been. I've been spending most of my time doing the analytics on the draft, since we have these other, film watchers, and I don't want to, triple or quadruple the work. So I'll have to take a look at that and see what I can find out, but I don't really know. So, but thank you, Jesse. I appreciate you coming in with that comment. It's it's a good one to make me start to get into these prospects a little bit more, and get a little bit out of the analytics and start getting back into watching the prospects, which I did enjoy. I used to do that all the time as a kid. It was fun to look at the college games, and then grab those Street and Smith draft magazines or whatever, and start to work on prospects or whatever. It was fun. But yeah, I'll have to check that out. So thank you very much. And Mile High Huddle's coming, a solid offensive guard from TCU. Steady. Okay, well, good. I'm glad. Thank you for jumping in there, Scott. I appreciate that. It's good to know. Big body, almost 6'4", 330 pounds, not overly mobile, but solid. Well, there you go, Jesse. We have Scott here, and thank God he was at the you were at Shrine or at the Senior Bowl. Senior Bowl, yeah. Checking these guys out at the Senior Bowl. So, yeah, and he might fit in the Sean Payton offensive line. Offensive line for Sean Payton has been typically bigger over the last decade than we've seen it the Broncos. So I think that might be a fit. I don't know. Hopefully it turns out. I mean, he went out and got Carl Nix, who's in the 5th round, big guy, and he turned out to be a pretty good player. So, yeah, we'll see. I hope so. We got Chase Wellner coming in saying saying morning, Tom. Appreciate it, Chase. Thank you for coming in. Now, I think unless there's some other comment that I need to grab that I haven't seen, I think I'm going to wrap up the show. I appreciate everybody coming in here. Now, don't forget to go and subscribe. Make sure you get these alerts. Check out the other shows. I'm on 2 other shows. It's I went from one show that lasts about 30 minutes in the morning on Friday to a Saturday night show with Ron White, which is just getting started. We think we have 8 shows in. It's a very fun show. It give you something to do on a Saturday night. And then Mile High Insiders on Wednesday with Luke Patterson. I jumped into that show. And Nick Kendall decided to make sure he does his other shows. He's got a lot going on. So I jumped in that, and that was fun. So be sure to check those out. And then check out the rest of the shows. I mean, you got Broncos for Breakfast with Scott and Nick in the morning too. So thank you very much, Broncos fans. I'm looking forward to this offseason. I think the Broncos can really do some good work if they are aggressive enough and smart enough. Aggressive and smart. That's what I want to see in the free agency. And then hopefully their draft, they can get lucky. And that's what it is. They need to have some good fortune. And the Broncos are in need of good fortune. I think that changes next year, and both injury bug and hitting on some later round players. So thank you very much, and have a great day, Broncos fans.